live.
All right, it's 9:30. I think we'll jump right in since we have a lot of discussion. So welcome everybody to the first coffee break of the year. We're really excited to kick off 2021 with this particular event, as we'll be celebrating hitting 30 years as an organization, which is incredibly exciting. Of course, we couldn't have made it 3 decades without volunteers and partners and supporters who have helped us protect the Sky Island region. So thank you for sticking with us and being part of this incredible journey. We also want to acknowledge that the years of conservation science work we've done here have been on native lands. The Sky Island Alliance office is located in Tucson, where we are guests of the land of the Tohono O'odham and Pasakayaki people, and our work throughout the Sky Island region stretches through land that many native people call home, including but not limited to the 22 federally recognized tribes in the state of Arizona, and some of whose lands also stretch across what is now the US-Mexico border. So Sky Island Alliance started in 1991. We have a lot of history and stories to cover. To lead our discussion, we have 3 panelists today: Dale Turner and Paul Hirt, both founding members of the organization, and also our current executive director, Louise Mistle, will be here to take you through the time that we have spent doing conservation work. Before we get started, I do ask that everybody stay muted throughout the discussion. However, if you have questions that you'd like to pose to our panelists today, please drop them in the chat box. We will have a time for question and answers at the end of the event, where we'll share your questions with the panelists. And so now we'll jump right in, and I apologize for cat sounds in the background. They like to fight when I talk. So we'll get started. Dale, Paul, and Louise, would you mind briefly telling us about your backgrounds and how you originally got involved with Sky Island Alliance? Louise, I'll have you start.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Louise Mistle, and I'm currently Executive Director at Sky Island Alliance. And I'm really honored to be here today with Dale and Paul, who have helped create this wonderful organization from the ground up that I've had the great privilege of working with for somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 years. I actually, I first came to Sky Island Alliance, or first met Sky Island Alliance as a volunteer when I was doing my degree in science at the University of Arizona. And I went out on a volunteer weekend at Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area to close a road. And I was hooked right away. I got involved with the organization and was able to work with the organization to do my honors project as part of my degree. So I got to learn all about conservation planning and do some work on the Aravaipa Wilderness area, helping write some management recommendations for that area. And then I just from there got involved with more work, came on to staff, and have had the wonderful pleasure of working many different positions within the organization. So really thrilled to be part of this organization and looking forward to hearing more from Dale and Paul about how it came to be.
Thank you, Louise. How about you, Dale?
Okay, yeah. So I started as a freelance journalist and environmental activist. And at the time of the founding of Sky Island Alliance, I'd been heavily engaged with local Sierra Club, working on environmental issues in Southern Arizona. Subsequent to that, went to grad school, became a biologist, worked for National Park Service, and then I spent close to 20 years working for the Nature Conservancy. I don't know, and I'm still a supporter of Sky Island Alliance, one of my favorite organizations.
Awesome, thanks, Dale. How about you, Paul?
First, thanks everybody for joining us on this retrospective of 3 decades of a grassroots environmental organization. It's been a pleasure to be involved over the years, and I'm glad to see so many people on to hear about that legacy. Before we formed Sky Island Alliance, like Dale, I was living in Tucson, working as an environmental activist. Back in those days, nobody got paid. We were all volunteers. I was a conservation chair for the Grand Canyon Chapter Sierra Club in the early and mid 80s and the Rincon group, and was involved in the Mount Graham battle and forest planning and wilderness designation. I spent probably 30 hours a week of my spare time when I wasn't waiting tables or cooking in a restaurant, fighting the good fight. And ended up going to grad school at the U of A. And while I was in my PhD program studying environmental history, is when we decided to form a new organization that was focused on the binational Sky Island region. We thought that there was a gap in the grassroots movement, that we needed, all the national organizations had their own priorities. There was some local control, but a lot of times national organizations have certain priorities and expectations. And we just thought, let's create an organization that's founded in the Sky Island region, that's dedicated to protecting biodiversity in the Sky Island region, that sees the area as a whole landscape with no borders being relevant, state borders irrelevant, land ownership borders irrelevant, the international border irrelevant. It's all one unified landscape, and we need to think at the landscape level. And so that's what we decided to do in 1991. Sat down and with a group of core activists from a variety of different groups and said, all right, what should we call ourselves, and what should be our mission statement, and what should we do to make a difference in this region that we all live in and love so much?
Awesome. So kind of moving on from that, can we talk a little bit more about the founding of Skyland Alliance? Can you take us back to that exact moment when you sat down and decided that, and share any stories from those early days?
Yeah, let me jump in here because I remember distinctly when we decided we needed a new organization, and it was during the first Bush administration. And I don't know, those of you who are old enough to remember the first Bush administration, he said, this one-term president said he wanted to be the quote unquote environmental president, which, after Ronald Reagan, we thought that any Republican president wanting to be an environmental president was kind of stretching things. In any case, his way of being the environmental president was to put $260 million into a quote unquote recreation initiative for the public lands, to promote recreation on the nation's public lands. That was it. That was his big, push for being the environmental president. And of course, all the different national forests and BLM state offices all said, all right, how do we get a piece of this pie? And the Coronado National Forest came up with a proposal to designate large sections of the Coronado National Forest as a national recreation area. And that was kind of the spur for us. We thought, we had already been fighting bad proposals, mining proposals. We were fighting the telescopes on Mount Graham. We were fighting overgrazing. We're always fighting bad decisions and bad policies. And here was another one. When we have an opportunity to sort of designate what this region is special for, what's its true environmental value. And the administration was saying recreation, which means roads and campgrounds and more use. And we decided what we need is a local group that's going to say, no, this region's key value is biological diversity. And we should be emphasizing, along with, recreation, responsible recreation, we should be emphasizing biological diversity preservation and ecological restoration and education of both policymakers and the general public about the biodiversity values in the region. We needed a positive vision, we thought. Let's form a group that's going to have an optimistic and positive vision about the values of the region, rather than thinking of it as, grazing, mining, and recreation were the resources that everybody thought about when they thought about the Coronado National Forest. And we wanted them to think about something different, not just an exploitable resource or something you can use, but, the wealth of the biological world itself. So, and I'm going to hand this off to Dale now. A group of us went out to, Linda and I, my wife and I, had bought a little 3.5 acre inholding in Cave Creek Canyon in the Chiricahuas in 1989. About 2 years before we formed Sky Island Alliance. And we all traipsed out there for a weekend and camped out on our property in maybe the crown jewel of the Sky Islands, if I can in a biased way suggest that. And we sort of said, what would this organization look like, and what should we call ourselves? So let me hand it off to Dale and see if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, Paul's biased. You know, I have my own favorite Sky Islands, but that's one of them. That's definitely one of them. Yeah, so I mean, that's a great summary, Paul. I guess I would just emphasize that many of us involved in the founding, actually, I think all of us were you know, at that point we were already sort of old war horses. We had been through many campaigns, and it seemed like it was just this endless cycle of stupid ideas that we were trying to stop.
Right.
And you know, I think we had all sort of independently come to the recognition that we could spend the rest of our lives fighting stupid ideas, or we could try and change the underlying paradigm of what's important about this region, about this place. And maybe if we were successful with that, a lot of those ideas just like would never get off the ground. They would just be, you know, it wouldn't pass the straight face test. And, you know, that had been, I guess, a theme that had really become obvious with the Mount Graham telescope fight. The further we went down the road of trying to understand what the top of Mount Graham meant, there was all these endemic plants and animals that are only found in this one little spot right on top of one of the highest mountains in the region. And that was the exact spot that somebody wanted to cut down all the trees and build a bunch of, you know, buildings and telescopes. You know, and it's like nothing against astronomy. I have friends who are astronomers, really. But putting it there, just, it was so entirely wrong that just, you know, that knowledge of the richness, the uniqueness of that place, you know, the further we looked, the more widespread we could see that richness and uniqueness across the region. And it was these Sky Islands, you know, the mountains of pine, fir, you know, and down into the mixed conifer and oak, rising above the sea of deserts and grasslands, with species that have been isolated there since the Pleistocene. That was really part of what makes this a special part of the world. And it wasn't isolated to just Arizona. You know, it's part of a gradient stretching from the Sierra Madre in northern Mexico up to the Rocky Mountains. You have these influences from both sides overlapping, and then these isolated mountain ranges. So we saw a need to really, you know, look bigger, think bigger, think across the biological region, not a corner of one state of one country. So, go ahead, Paul.
Speaking of thinking bigger, we were influenced by the Wildlands Project and Wildlands Network concept, the deep ecology, and the folks who were like Michael Soule and other guy's name Reed Noss were arguing that in order to truly preserve biological diversity, you needed to have large core areas protected as wilderness or quasi-wilderness, buffer zones around them where you had more uses, but you still sought to protect the diversity, and then corridors between those core areas, sort of refugia habitat for the biological diversity of the planet. And so there's a lot of talk about landscape level conservation, core preserved areas and corridors between them that was becoming more and more popular in the late 80s and early 90s. And that was at the foundation of our vision for the Sky Islands, because we saw each of the Sky Islands as a kind of a unique core area. And we were starting to think also about migration corridors between them and connectivity between them. And so these are still part of Sky Island Alliance's central sort of conservation concern, and that was baked in from the beginning.
Yeah, and I am listening to you all speak, and I was looking back through some old annual reports before we got together today, and there's a wonderful quote in here from Dale about the Sky Island Alliance starting as a small group of volunteers with a big vision that we could show this region to be a world-class treasure and gain the protection it deserves. And I really think that audacious vision is what drew me to this organization, and it is really steeped into the organization, as well as the science pieces you're talking about. I just think it's amazing what's been done to advance that goal over the last 30 years.
Yeah, I think the role of science has been big from the beginning. You know, some of our founders, many of our initial sort of active members were working scientists within academia. And one of the first big projects that we undertook was organizing a conference to really compile what was known about the Sky Island region. We had been talking about doing that amongst ourselves. And then we learned that the Forest Service, particularly the Rocky Mountain Research Station of the Forest Service, was talking about having a conference of research within the Coronado National Forest. So, I mean, rather than having competing conferences, we decided to merge forces and put together something larger. And that led to the first Madrean Conference in 1994. And that was really striking, because one of the things that we put out there, that we asked people to bring to the conference, was to summarize what was known of the region for their discipline. And it was more than we had anticipated. What we've been hearing anecdotally, and what really came out at that conference, was that for virtually every biological discipline, this was a hotspot. But they had not actually been talking to each other, the biologists. So, I mean, the bird watchers knew that the Sky Islands were, you know, this incredible place to add to your life list. And Cave Creek Canyon, where Paul still has a home, is one of those, you know, hotspots. Birders from all over the world go to, like, see something for the first time.
Quetzals this year.
Yeah.
It's what?
Eared quetzals this year.
Eared quetzals,
Eared
yeah.
quetzals all summer in the canyon for the first time in 20 years.
But, you know, it was also a hotspot for mammals and for reptiles and for insects, you know, bees, fungi, you know, it's just got, the list goes on. And the plant diversity of these mountain ranges is just like off the chart for North America. So, you know, having, you know, all these people actually talk to each other about what's special and how we can, you know, what remains to be learned. It was really exciting, you know, and it resulted in this phone book of proceedings that, you know, I still refer to, other people still refer to. That was good enough that, you know, we've done it a few other times.
Like every 2 years.
You know, makes good doorstops and great reference material. So the most recent one was what, 2 years ago?
I think 2018 was the most recent.
2018, yeah. And you know, every time there is this palpable excitement. People from both sides of the international border, people from the universities, from agencies, from the NGOs, talking in the hallways about, you know, what has been done, what could be done, what you and I can do together. So, you know, conferences have kind of a bad reputation as being a place to get a bad nap, but this particular series of conferences, I think, has been really helpful in changing how our society in this region understands this region, how we see our place in the world. And that's pretty powerful.
You know, if I can jump on that, because you remind me, there's some amazing accomplishments of Sky Island Alliance. And one was just changing the name of the region. Nobody referred to the region as the Sky Islands until we created Sky Island Alliance. The word came from a book that was published in 1976 by a writer named Weldon Heald, who lived at the Southwestern Research Station in Cave Creek Canyon before it was the research station. It was a dude ranch. And he lived there, and he wrote a book about living in the Chiricahuas, life in the Chiricahuas in the 1950s. And he titled it Sky Island. And that name was just compelling to us. And we thought that's a perfect moniker for what's special about this region, is that we have these forested mountains that are like skies in an island of desert and grassland, as Dale said. And we started referring to it as the Sky Island region. And it really only took about 5 years before everybody else started calling it the Sky Island region, including finally, after about 10 years, the Forest Service adopted the moniker and biologists adopted the moniker. Now everybody refers to it as the Sky Island region. And that was a result of this organization saying it wanted to change the narrative, change the way people thought about the place. And as Dale was just mentioning, the thing that we really cared about was basing our conservation vision on science. And those Madrean Archipelago Biodiversity and Management conferences that Dale helped to organize and helped to publish those, that brought scientists together in what used to be fragmented knowledge about the region, brought it and unified it and brought people together who studied different resources to talk to each other and share what was special about the region. So this organization served to unify, in many ways, the knowledge about the region in a way that it was never unified before. And finally, our core mission at the beginning was we can't do everything ourselves, and we don't want the federal agencies, we don't want to sort of tell the federal agencies what they ought to do. That was kind of the standard lobbying practice in the 1980s, was to complain to the Forest Service about what they were doing wrong and badger them about what they should do right. And we did the same for the BLM and the State Land Department and the National Park Service. It was always sort of like reliant on them trying to do the right thing. We decided, let's not wait for any of the land managing agencies to do the right thing. Let's get out there and do it ourselves. Let's collaborate with private landowners and with federal agency people and anybody else, scientists, policymakers, volunteers, activists. Let's get everybody together to do the work on the ground that will make a difference in the region. And so that's another thing that Dale's promotion of these biodiversity conferences helped to accomplish, was getting people to sort of step outside their narrow realm of action and begin collaborating with each other. I mean, it was remarkable to us when the Forest Service decided they wanted to publish the proceedings of the first Madrean conference. We were wondering what will ever happen to all of this. and wondering who might publish it. And the Rocky Mountain Forest and Range Experiment Station in Denver had participated and heard about it. They thought it was so important that they wanted to publish the first one and became co-publishers of the rest of them. Getting the Forest Service to work with us to highlight biodiversity and management issues in the Skyline region was an incredible accomplishment, because before that, environmentalists and the federal agencies were really not working together and did not have a good relationship. It was pretty conflictual, and we decided we wanted to promote collaboration and cooperation. And I think we've done a remarkable job of building bridges between people who can make a difference in the region.
I think you have indeed. I think that theme runs so strong with our work in my time here at the organization, and it's just vital to this large landscape conservation. And, you know, we're still doing all kinds of projects in cooperation with these land management agencies. You know, they have their own challenges now, for sure, with budget cuts and things like that. And we can get a lot done when we find those shared goals, work with volunteers. You know, Sky Island Alliance is able to help find that manpower and that funding, and get out there and restore springs for frogs, and close roads and restore that land back to connected, and all of these projects. And we've got lots on the docket in the coming years. So that that core value has lived on strong, and it's a part of Sky Island Alliance that I really appreciate and love being able to work in that way.
Yeah, that reminds me that, you know, one of the first big projects that Sky Island Alliance engaged in that really, you know, brought in a lot of volunteer work, volunteers, was the road surveys and then road closures. Coronado National Forest had a road, like an official road network, you know, maps of approved roads. And they had hundreds of miles of unofficial roads that had been created by, you know, the public, often generally illegally, some mechanically, some, you know, with bulldozers, but mostly just by driving off, you know, getting to the end of a road and keeping going. You know, there is sort of the Captain Kirk mentality to, you know, boldly drive where no man has driven before, because usually guys. But the Forest Service didn't have the resources to know what was on their land in terms of that road network. So we organized the road inventory for the Coronado National Forest, and hired our first paid employee, Andy Holsworth, to coordinate the work of volunteers, to go out every weekend for several years to every mountain range in the Coronado National Forest, and find out what roads were on their forest lands. And, you know, map them, take photos of their condition, write reports about it, provided all those to the Forest Service as part of their forest plan renewal. And then, working in collaboration with the Forest Service, started the process of closing the most egregious examples of those illegal roads. And that was actually a great partnership. The Forest Service provided, you know, permission to work on the forest, and they would bring out a truckload of giant rocks to actually, like, put a physical barrier on the road. And after that, it was volunteers with Sky Island Alliance making the visible part of the road essentially go away, putting plants in the roadway, breaking up the surface of the roadway, putting water bars so that, you know, stream channels could continue to do their thing. And some of those earliest closures are still closed decades later, and you wouldn't know they had been a road now. And, you know, it's just good fun to go out there and take this scar on the landscape and turn it into a healthy patch of habitat. So
Yeah,
does that, Louise, sound like that was part of what got you engaged?
Absolutely. It was great fun out there. We were working in an area where a road was impacting a riparian area, some flowing water, and planting willows, you know, replanting the plants around the edges and getting that road closed. I thought, wow, this is what I want to do with my science degree. I want to use science on the ground, you know, to make a difference for all the amazing animals and plants and places here in the Sky Islands.
You know, another way that we took matters into our own hands to make a difference is with our wildlife tracking program. That was also one of the very earliest efforts that we engaged in. We wanted to do landscape level conservation, and we knew in order to do that, in order to identify wildlife migration corridors, in order to identify how wildlife of concern moved across the landscape from one habitat to another, you know, we had to know where they were and where they were moving, and nobody had that information. Arizona Game and Fish Department had a pretty good amount of information about how many deer were out there, how many huntable species there were, but nobody knew anything about migration, movement, corridors, and how barriers on the land like interstate highways and fences impacted migration, wildlife movement. And so we decided, okay, well, the data isn't out there. In order to advocate for landscape level conservation, we need that data. Nobody's collecting it, so let's do it. And we hired somebody, offered training sessions on how to identify, I think it was 5 different mammal tracks is how we started out, trying to identify tracks of felines and some canines. And we would train people on track identification. We'd set them up with a transect. We'd create groups of 3 who would adopt a particular transect in an area where we thought there was likely to be wildlife movement, important migration corridors. And we would have them document, go out there and actually identify tracks in sandy washes, for example, and document what they saw and how often they saw it and what direction they were moving in. And later we were able to move towards camera traps and have cameras out there. And the technology has really allowed that program to expand significantly. But right at the beginning, this again was core to Sky Island Alliance's mission, is that we see a need, we want to advance conservation, there's data lacking, we want our advocacy to be science-based, so let's generate the data we need to make an effective argument to influence land management or land policy. And we started taking that information. One of the first major successes we had was that we were able to take that information and share it with the Arizona Department of Transportation as they were doing highway planning to help them determine where they needed to create wildlife crossings on highways and interstates. And they came to us and said, you're the only ones who have this kind of data. Can you help us decide where we need to put in wildlife passage? And that was an amazing step forward for us. And I'm really proud of just remembering that.
Yeah, that's been one of our flagship programs for many years, and we still have lots of volunteers and donors and supporters who really have come to the organization through that tracking program, and then being a part of that, you know, collecting important data and translating it into policy changes and protections for these corridors.
We should do a shout out to Janice Prisbol, who founded that program, and then to Jessica Lamberton, who took over from Janice.
They did a lot of job. Yep, and they actually won an award for the organization from the Federal Highway Administration for environmental excellence for wildlife linkages assessments. So very impressive, very impressive. And thanks to all the volunteers who helped, you know, make that possible. I'm wondering, so we talked at the beginning about, you know, the entire region and how it sits, and that the U.S.-Mexico border is cutting through the region. And we haven't talked too much about our work in Mexico. And Dale, I know you've led some of that work with the Madrean Archipelago expeditions, and Paul, you were on the board when we really started developing that work more. And it'd be great to talk a little bit about how we've expanded into really working in the region holistically from where you all sit.
Yeah, so from the beginning, we recognized that, you know, the international border was an artificial division in this Sky Island region. It's, you know, roughly half and half US and Mexico, if you look at it, you know, as a biological region. And we really wanted to address it as a unified region. So, you know, we tried from the very beginning to engage Mexican academics, agencies, NGOs. Didn't have tremendous success early on. It was just hard to find kind of like the right point of engagement. I mean, the Madrean conferences definitely brought people from Sonora to be part of those efforts. But you know, and you know, one of the things we really pushed early on, like never quite got off the ground, was creating a peace park. You know, something that would be a federal designation on both sides of the border. So that's what, like Glacier and Banff, is that, you know, on both sides of the US-Canada border.
Pipe has one too.
Organ Pipe and Pinacate out in the western deserts of Arizona and Sonora. But yeah, so we were looking to get something like that within the Sky Island region. Never quite got traction with that. But starting, so one of the things that I have done in my day job, my current day job with Nature Conservancy, one of the things that I did in the early 2000s was work on putting together an eco-regional plan for this Sky Island region. Had a different name. So everybody's got to have their own name for the same region, you know. But as part of that, I tried to assemble all the available information about the distribution of, say, 350 key species for conservation across the region. So, you know, I went to every data source I could find at that point to come up with localities for, like, say, where's the like Chiricahua fox squirrel, you know, let's see, what else? Black bear, you know, just like a bunch of different species that might be important in one way or another to management or conservation of the region. And the resulting maps showed this really high density of information starting at that international border and going north. And south of the border, there was almost nothing. And what there was, much of it was, you know, like a century old. They're just, you know, the Sky Islands of northern Mexico had not been well documented. So, you know, we knew this, and, you know, having a map just kind of like made it obvious, but what to do about it. We finally had a chance. One of our early executive directors, Matt Scraw, managed through series of connections one of our board members had with a French foundation. We got a grant for $500,000 to do biological inventories of sky islands in Sonora. Like, who could have guessed? And that started the Madrean Archipelago Biodiversity Assessment, or MABA, as affectionately known.
Not MAGA, but MABA.
Yes, yes, very different, very different. And, you know, we hired Tom Van Devender to be the field coordinator, and that was like one of the best single, you know, decisions I've ever been involved in, because Tom had this wealth of knowledge and experience in that border region and contacts in Mexico. And he started this series of field trips, field expeditions that grew to the point of, you know, between 30 and 50 people going out for a week at a time, and roughly half gringos, half Mexicans, biologists and agency staff from both sides of the border, students, to do an intensive inventory of one mountain range in a week. And it was a lot of fun. Just, you know, getting out there with a bunch of biologists, just looking for stuff, and people who really know how to do it. It meant that, you know, not everybody would have a great day or even a great trip, but somebody on the trip would have a great day every day you were out there. And, you know, it's like a new species for science. You know, it might be, you know, a beetle. It's okay. You know, it's like, it's brand new. Nobody's ever seen this thing before. You know, a new mountain range for a particular rattlesnake. Hey, you know, that's cool. And, you know, it's just fun to walk around and explore places. So that work has continued, and now there is this great database of the distribution of a whole lot of species across the Sky Island region.
We should give a shout out here to Sky Jacobs, who created a website documenting much of the beauty and diversity of the Sonoran Sky Islands. Does anybody know what his web address is? Or the name?
Wild Sonora is the name.
That's it, wildsonora.org probably. Anyway, worth going to look up, if he's still maintaining it. That was a pretty rich site 15 years ago. I don't know where it's at today.
Well, did you want to jump in, Anna, or do you want me to continue on here?
Yeah, so we have about 18 minutes left. And I don't see any questions in the chat, so we can just keep going with the awesome stories and discussion. And I was wondering what reaching 30 years as an organization means to all of you individually. You can just jump in if you have thoughts.
Well, I'll start as the lone historian on the panel. I'm used to thinking about change over time and legacy. And I think what first comes to mind is that a lot of things get launched and then peter out. It reminds me of, you know, ghost towns in the American West. You know, there's hundreds of former towns that turned to nothing in the American West. And there was all kinds of promise at the beginning. You know, maybe it was a mineral strike and a whole bunch of people moved in, and sort of like in the Chiricahuas, there's a former town called Hilltop. This is one of these classic ghost towns. And a big silver vein was discovered there. It's about a canyon, one canyon north of Cave Creek Canyon in what's called Whitetail Canyon. And a big silver strike was discovered, and a company moved in, built a town, and started exploiting that silver vein. And it played out in 2 years. In 2 years, it was gone, and the town closed down. And you can go and see the remnants of it. All the buildings that were there are gone. We've got one on our property as a cabin. It was a miner's bunkhouse in Whitetail Canyon at the Hilltop Mine. There are hundreds of these ghost towns all over the West. There's also, I would say, probably hundreds of grassroots environmental organizations that sprouted up and died. They couldn't get funding, or their charismatic leader, moved on, or people just got tired. It's hard to sustain a largely volunteer organization, which this is, at the grassroots level. Membership isn't paying the bills. You've got to constantly fundraise. And you have to have good people on board. You have to have a lot of local support. You have to have a great vision. You have to be doing work that matters in order to sustain that kind of support. And the fact that this organization, invented in the minds of a couple of volunteers, a handful of volunteers 30 years ago, has turned into within about 15 years, it was an organization with something like 10 staff and about $1 million budget. None of us could believe it, because nobody got paid to be an environmental activist back in 1991 when we started the organization. And within 10 years, we were able to sustain, we couldn't pay them very much and there weren't very many benefits, but we could sustain gifted environmental activists so that they could pay the rent and fix their cars and live on a salary to do the work that they loved. And the fact that we're still out there raising money and doing important work and supporting environmental activists with a living wage, at least not $7 an hour, to me is a remarkable testament to the vision and the commitment and the importance of the region.
Louise, how about you? How do you feel about hitting 30 years?
Well, I'm so thankful that I found the organization when I did, and it's really, I was kind of stunned when I reflected back that I've been able to be a part of it for about half of its life. And I think what Paul said at the end was really what I was thinking, that the ongoing success of the organization is really a testament, I think, to the big vision and the pulling in the community, working with volunteers, helping people understand where they live and want to be a part of protecting that place. That it's, we've brought a community together that really cares about this place, wants to study it and understand it better, wants to protect it through policy and work on the ground, and that lives on. And I see it living on in all the wonderful notes I've gotten from supporters this year about how much they appreciate this work and how much they care about these different individual Sky Islands and the region as a whole and our wild neighbors. It's just, and I think the science-based piece and the combination of doing the work to understand what's at stake, but then also putting boots on the ground, so to speak, and doing the work on the land to make a difference. I think that combination of approaches is really successful, and it engages a lot of people. It makes it possible for us to continue building relationships with different landowners, and it creates sustainability for sure.
Yeah, so I would echo both Paul and Louise. I think the big vision helps a lot. The boots on the ground, the volunteers give Sky Island Alliance something that few others have, and that our partners want. I know, Forest Service has welcomed it. Nature Conservancy has welcomed it. Sky Island Alliance volunteers have been critical in getting rid of invasive species in Aravaipa Canyon. That TNC has land, but we haven't had the staff, the personnel to actually get out there and yank vinca out of the riparian zone. I mean, that is a massive undertaking. And Sky Island has kept doing that. I guess I would just say, like, looking forward, taking 30 years of history, if we can assume, you know, Sky Island will still be in business 30 years from now, but that's a real opportunity to not just think big, but think long. So what are the projects that can be accomplished, not this year or next year, but, you know, if we work at it for a decade, what can we accomplish? You know, and I think we've got some examples of that. The all that information gathered through the MAVA project, the road surveys, the wildlife tracking, now the camera tracking projects that Emily is running. You know, it's a real opportunity to think into the future of, like, what durability offers, what are the opportunities there with a long-term persistence of an organization. And I guess, you know, it's one thing about an organization is bigger than any one of us, you know, because people come and go, you know, through relationships with each other or with organizations, you know, but the fact that important work can get handed off to new people to put new energy into carrying that forward, it opens up tremendous opportunities just for these long-term projects.
Yeah, that last point I think is really important, Dale. One of the reasons that this organization has been able to sustain itself is that there's been a kind of an unbroken parade of committed, you know, people taking over on staff and on the board. You know, there's a bunch of board members who don't get paid for their work and have to go to 4 meetings a year and do strategic planning and manage budgets. And you know, if you can't get good people to serve on a board, your organization can fall apart. Same thing with the staff. There's been a lot of staff turnover, but there's always somebody, some amazing person with a staunch commitment who wants to do good work in the field, and we offer that. And we've always been able to hire amazing staff people who usually stick around for a pretty long time. The last thing that Dale mentioned was that the work that we do also changes over time, sometimes in relation to grants that we have, sometimes in relation to new threats that we face. When we started in 1991, there wasn't much talk about climate change. We talk a lot about climate change now. When we started in 1991, there was just the initial inkling that there was going to be some border infrastructure going in that we weren't happy about, but nothing like we've been facing over the last 10 to 15 years. So we started battling border wall construction well after the organization was founded, and spent a lot of time working on that. So looking forward to the future, you know, one of the great things about this organization is that it's nimble. It's driven by the people who are involved in it, volunteers as much as staff and board members. And if there's an issue that needs to be addressed, catastrophic fires is another one. In 1991, we still had what used to be called the normal fire regime in the West. And that's gone out the window. You know, our fire regime now, it looks nothing like the fire regime of the last 500 years. We're facing an entirely different future in fire management, and it requires a different approach, more collaborative approach for sure. Firescape, which is a collaborative way of thinking about fire management region-wide, was innovated in Southeast Arizona, and Sky Island Alliance was involved in it from the beginning. So there's always new issues that need to be addressed. We're never going to be able to rest on our laurels. And those of you who are on the call today, you're an integral part of deciding what we ought to work on and how we get the resources, the volunteers, as well as the money to make a difference, to, you know, put a thumb on the scale and begin to restore restore what's been lost in the region and protect what we still have. It's up to all of us.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. We're lucky to have some of our wonderful board members on this call learning about the founding of the organization, and they are indeed wonderful, committed people that help keep us going, along with the volunteers and staff. And I think in my time at Sky Island Alliance, that nimble point is really important. You know, we're doing that work to figure out where can we make a difference, what most needs our attention, and shifting our work to address that over the years. And I think that, along with that real strong foundation of a vision and these values and the scientific concepts of you know, a connected landscape with these core places and corridors, keeps us grounded. Well, we've got lots of wonderful work going on, which we'll be talking about more this year as we move through the year. But to continue this path of documenting who lives here, you know, what's at stake, doing the citizen science to understand where the most important places are to protect with our photofauna work, our border wildlife study that was mentioned, our spring seeker work. And one of the efforts that has grown in the last year that I know staff is all very fond of and we really enjoy working on is engaging more young people, students, in a very formal way in our binational internship to help continue to build these dedicated, equipped folks who will hopefully be staff members and board members and continue their work in this region to protect these special places. I wanted to just share, I know we're coming up on time and we might have a couple questions, but I wanted to share some words from Paul and Dale from some writings in an annual report from years ago, that just thinking about the future and hope, you know, hope for the future. We recognize that, this is from Paul in an annual report from 2007. We recognize that humans are just one species inhabiting complex ecosystems, and that our actions must be sensitive and responsible, both to our fellow humans and to those other forms of life with whom we share the planet. And we can do that not just by reducing our demands and setting aside protected areas, but by actively restoring damaged habitats, degraded streams and wetlands, and extirpated species. And I think, you know, you end by saying there remains much work to be done. And I've got a annual report note from Dale that says the need is huge and the opportunities are great. And both of you all close by saying that Sky Island Alliance is the right organization to make a difference. And I think that's true. And I so appreciate the work you all did. I know it was an enormous amount of work to found this organization and build this community and provide that vision and get us going. And it's really, I'm so honored to be a part of it. And I hope I can do that vision justice in my role and with the staff we have over the next however many years I'm here, but for the organization, the next 30 years for sure.
Well, Louise, you deserve tremendous thanks for guiding the organization forward in your time as executive director, and for moving programs forward in your time before that, when you were, I think you started doing GIS mapping for us, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Moved on to programs and then moved on to executive directorship. So thank you so much for keeping this organization moving forward with you know, your ability to bring people together, to work with funders as well as volunteers and manage staff. It's just, we're so grateful and thankful that we have you.
Thanks, Paul.
I would echo that thanks. Thank you, Louise, and thank you to the current staff. I mean, this is a hard year for everybody, and you know, I'm sure it's no less difficult for Sky Island Alliance, but you know, keeping that work going, that's huge. And I would say that, you know, for me at least, the work with Sky Island Alliance, it was always fun. I mean, you know, some of my very favorite people in the world, and you know, that means that showing up to do the work was just getting together with my best friends. it remains that way. I like the people at Sky Island, so I'll keep showing up.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yes, and thank you to the amazing staff. They've done a great job of keeping programs going and innovating in amazing ways this last year to adjust to the situation. I do want to say, I want to say thank you so much, Dale and Paul. I'm really glad we were able to get you together. This has been super fun for me and moving, and I'm seeing lots of wonderful comments from folks about how inspiring this is and how wonderful it is to reflect back on how the organization started and where we're going. And I do want to say that since this is our 30-year anniversary, we're going to be doing some more events like this. So stay tuned. We're hoping to have some more conversations with folks who have been involved in building and growing the organization and all the wonderful conservation work. I think, Anna, are there other announcements or any questions, I guess, before we?
No, Emily was able to answer the questions in chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just look forward to sharing more, and we'll be putting that out in our newsletter and on our social media. So, but yeah, thank you all for joining us this morning. And thank you again, Louise, Dale, and Paul, for taking the time to share your stories with us today.
See you all on the trail.
Yeah.
Yes, out there in the field.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.